I'm Evan Douglas, the Dean of the School of Architecture at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. And it's a great pleasure and honor to introduce this afternoon's speaker, Si Chen, the founder and principal of the widely acclaimed firm AtelierXi, based in Shenzhen, China. Established in 2017, AtelierXi has experienced remarkable success in only 4 years after completing a series of relatively small but exquisite civic and cultural projects. Considered one of the more exciting young design firms that has emerged from China in recent years, Chen is actively engaged in revitalizing urban and rural communities through the strategic deployment of contemporary architecture. In contrast to many of his peers in the profession who have chosen to pursue more mainstream high-end commissions within the public and private sector, Chen appears to have found a certain creative inertia, taking on more gritty commissions in marginalized areas as a means to initiate incremental change over time. The obvious challenges associated with the sparseness of materials, the absence of certain building expertise, and the strict limitations of capital that often accompany projects in support of disenfranchised populations are not insurmountable obstacles for Chen, but on the contrary, powerful motivation to assume a more innovative stance throughout the design process. For instance, in the miniature series project located in Sihua, China, where the vastness of the rural landscape and the great distances between the village communities demanded a more distributed model as opposed to the single monumental building, as a means of promoting a stronger sense of kinship and connectivity among the indigenous population. Chen designed a series of small-scale, dreamlike pavilion structures that carefully inserted themselves into the fabric of these informal territories in the most ingenious ways. Faced with an illiterate design culture, very common in more remote regions throughout the world, an imperfect labor force, and the daunting challenge of persuading the local officials in Sihua of the larger merit of a serial approach to the deployment of his buildings, Chen rose to the occasion in the spirit of a seasoned veteran, drawing upon his deep appreciation as an architect for recombinatory geometry, spatial and perceptual ambiguities, and the larger promise of architecture as a myth-making machine. Each of his poetically charged structures reanimated their respective sites with a compelling sense of optimism and renewal. While the practice is relatively young, the work is creatively authentic, socially relevant, and represents, as exciting new research, an architectural trajectory worthy of our attention for many years to come. It's my honor to welcome Si Chen to RPI.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Dean Evan Douglas, for your generous words. And I was super surprised by the invitation to speak. It's a great honor for myself. It's also a great opportunity to say hi to my old friend and colleague, Mark Scudder. I now realize he's teaching in the school. We used to work together in Stephen Hall's office in New York. So such an unexpected reunion at this circumstance. Unfortunately for the COVID, we cannot meet face to face, but I think in future we will have chance. So maybe I can share my screen to start the lecture. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. So just to start, maybe let me just go just many people ask me a question, especially my American friends. They ask me, Chen, do you have anything to do with President Xi? So I have to clarify that there's no connection, because usually, like in the past, I remember Stephen, Mr. Stephen Ho, I used to work for, he always asked me, oh, we have a big museum competition. Like now we need your connection, your powerful connection. But unfortunately, Xi is only a common name. And I don't have super powerful connection to the politicians. So to explain where I come from, it's a little complicated because I grew up in China and in Wuhan, in a middle city. But then I studied in Beijing, and I spent almost 10 years working and studying in the US and also in Europe. And eventually I got back to Shenzhen. So I hesitated to just answer I come from China or come from Wuhan or come from Beijing. I think I enjoy my experience living in different places. I grew up in a time that everybody in China believes in globalization, and they believe human altogether will live one day altogether as one nation, and they share the similar culture and the same good life. But unfortunately, things are a little different now. Seems the world is separating, but I still hold that belief in my mind and through my my past experience. Did you see this this bar blocking the screen, or you see the full bleed screen? Let me. Okay. Sorry. Just one second. So sorry for the trouble. I used to live in New York from 2011 to 2015. During the time, I think now I remember I learned so much from the great city. I was about to write a book about cities through drawings because I'm a big fan of Italian writer Calvino. He and his novel Invisible Cities actually trying to use words to describe space and experience. And at the time, I was thinking maybe I can use drawings to describe the story as a reverse version of Calvino's novel. So I did many drawings about the place I love in New York City. Like this one on upper left side, that's Bryant Park. I always spend Saturday morning reading there. I saw the proportion of the space is very good. So I drew an unfolded elevation and put together with a plan to see why that works. And the other theater, that's by Times Square, I usually go there to see the movie. But surprisingly, the space after I enter the theater, it's expanded in a sectional way that across different properties at different height, that's totally different and irrelevant from the elevation. And another building I remember, and I went there many times, that's a Port Authority, like this little diagram. That's part of the grid system of Manhattan, but also part of the highway system with all the turning radius and the road. So it's hard to tell which system it belongs to. And I just do all those drawings. And eventually I didn't make the book happen, and it's just for fun. And another great thing about New York City is I got to experience a lot of great artwork. I remember in Brooklyn Academy of Music, I sit there 5 hours watching this great masterpiece opera, Einstein on the Beach, created by Robert Wilson and music by Philip Glass. And it's afterwards, I was so shocked by the performance, and I look at many articles and exhibitions by Robert Wilson, and I found very similar connection to architecture, how the space tell a story, how the story is told by architecture and space progression, and even every detail matters. Even the chair in the stage set designed by Robert Wilson has this very weird proportion that somehow express a feeling and attitude he showed in his opera. And another interesting thing is that's the first time I listened to Philip Glass. And this repeated figure and notes, it's almost geometric. That actually forms arithmetic progression, as he said, slowly expand and contracts. And although it looks like a mathematic notes or mathematic rule, but it's so emotionally powerful that I almost cried during the opera. And I think that's something to do with architecture too, that strictly defined geometry and the mathematic rules can generate a very emotional result. Just let me indulge in New York for a little bit more. Like I remember in Brooklyn Academy of BAM, of music at BAM, I watched Pina Bausch Wuppertal dance group. And before that, I watched Wender's documentary of Pina many times. So at the moment, I was more familiar with the architecture showed in the movie, the Sana's Pavilion School and the OMA's restoration project. But those architecture never showed such power until I saw the movie, because the intuitive dance that those dancers perform inside those architecture behave something very different from the architectural quality, but also build up a dialogue that's very emotional. Nowadays, I look back to my New York times, my times living in New York, and I think those memories are very influential to my later. But I had some confusion working at Stephen Hall's office. I was working on all Chinese project, and we do weird shapes. We do very big scale cultural project, and like those two museums you might saw somewhere earlier in the architecture magazine, they are 500,000 square feet big. And we had to do like a lot of bigger models. That's myself and my colleagues. And to understand how the space works. And I think that's a remarkable memory, but I was expecting all Chinese projects are like this. Therefore, I decided to go back and to set up my own practice in Shenzhen, China. And one thing to add, I choose Shenzhen because two firms I work for, the BIG in Copenhagen and Stephen Hall Architect, they both had very good work built in Shenzhen, and they are very happy about the experience working with the city. So I was looking for some commission like this, like the horizontal skyscraper or the big energy tower. But in the end, Shenzhen welcomed me with the urban village. That's the first commission in Shenzhen I received, I think in 2 years, and it's an urban village. Let me explain a little bit. In Shenzhen, the city grew up from a little fish village to a metropolis in 30 years. So original rural village are kept intact with its surrounding built up so quickly. So all the shopping mall, all the high-rise residential towers are built in like 10 years, and they gradually push the urban village in the middle. But it's a kind of interesting scale. That's only street life and only neighborhood the city left from original agriculture stage. And my commission was to design an entrance installation for this urban village. It's only 2 meters wide and 10 meters long. And it's very typical in those villages, the alley is too narrow that you can hardly see the sky. But when I enter this passageway, it's kind of interesting that all the noise from the bigger street outside getting down, and I feel calm and quiet in this space. And partly because the construction scaffolding actually covered the top. So I was thinking maybe I can keep this tunnel-like feeling and transform it into a art installation. So I was proposing to do a starry ceiling with little dots, little lighting dots in the ceiling and on the ground, and do the mirror on both sides. So with mirrors, we can reflect this very narrow space within 2 meters to an infinite width. So like this diagram, it's only, I think, 2 meters wide in the middle, but through numbers of reflection, the space can expand itself. That's the original concept. But the reality is even cruel, even more cruel, that there are a lot of meters like on the building. So we have to step back and also leave doors to inspection. So in the end, the alley is even narrower than 2 meters. It's only 1.8 meters. And we did all the lighting dots in the ceiling with fiberglass. That's 3,000 fiberglass, 1 millimeter width for the ceiling, and another 2,000 fiberglass for the floor. So we hired the workers to do to punch the holes in the plexiboard and put the fiberglass in. It's very amateur, and the construction precision is very rough. But in the end, we had another crazy idea to put the fiberglass in the floor. That's even harder than the ceiling. And the way we finally got to do is to insert those fiberglass on the cement floor. So right before the cement, the concrete floor dried, we can move around the fiberglass to form the ideal pattern we want to have. So in the end, when the floor dried up, we have this starry ground and starry sky on the ceiling and on the ground. And that's the realization of the installation. We have mirrors. We find in the end we choose stainless steel to reflect the space. In the daytime, it's very normal. Nobody know like what will happen here. But at night, when with all those lighting dots and with all the stainless steel mirror on the side, the space expand itself into a wider one. And I have to say, the first project we did very rough, and for the ground, it's hard to look at them at daytime. But at night, it has this miracle power. I have to say that kids all love it. They will come to this tunnel and they will touch the ground and ask how this is made of. And is this like a game? When you enter into the next one. So from this moment, I realized we are like my practice in China will be very different from the original imagination I had when I was working for those big names in the US or in the Europe. There's some interactive approach. Maybe we can explore more with the community and with people. And here is a rough ground, and even the color is not even, but we like the effect that people are stepping on this fiberglass ground. Another early work we did for the urban village is this Domino Pavilion. That's an invitation from Shenzhen and Hong Kong Urban and Architecture Biennale. They have this biennale happen every 2 years, and they choose some interesting place to hold the event. So this time they choose a small village. They have some historical building for the more famous architect. And for me, they say, oh, we have a abandoned rural house, and maybe you can transform it into something, maybe an open pavilion. And the moment I saw it, I feel it's a very similar model to Le Corbusier's Domino model. So it's interesting. They asked me, you can renovate this building, but you have to recover it to original state in future if the original owner comes back, because the original owner now he disappeared in the Australia, and he might never come back, but you have to reserve this possibility. So also with very limited funds for the construction, I was thinking maybe we can do something to show this domino system, the relation with the modernism architecture movement, because now in the urban village, all buildings are built in this model, and nobody knows this historical connection. So I was thinking maybe we don't do any decoration. We just keep the columns, and we do all the facade as operable, rotating big doors. So they can be all open to be an open gallery as a community platform, but they can be closed as a closed gallery and show some artwork. So that's how we ended up with this project. We did nothing but 48 big rotating steel doors. And because Shenzhen is very humid and hot, so we perforated all the big doors, and so the air can ventilate naturally. We don't use air condition for this pavilion because that's additional cost that we cannot afford. And that's the plan, very simple. We just have all the original columns, staircase, and the big rotating doors. And because the simplicity of the original structure, the doors are relatively the same dimension. So we basically did a lot of doors with the same dimension. That also saves a lot of money for the construction. So that's the result. We can see the close and openness of the facade. And when you are standing in the middle, inside the pavilion, actually the facade can allow you to see out or become entirely closed. And we intentionally put a special pattern head of Le Corbusier on the facade. So during the day, when the light comes in, people will see his glasses, his famous glasses from the interior. And we also analyzed all buildings in this village and recovered them into a simple domino system, the framework, the concrete framework, and showed the relation between the village and the modernism architecture for the public exhibition. So people might be curious, those village ask when they pass by, like who he is. We don't put any like introduction panels there. We just think it's kind of unspoken relation between the theory and the reality. And one thing for the roof, originally, we thought we can convert the roof into a sculpture rooftop garden. But in urban village, every building has those rebars remained, so they can build additional floor when they needed to. So people told us, no, you can't cut those rebars. You have to keep them at the corner of the roof. So that's why eventually we decided to do the roof garden with rebar, with the steel rebar. So we do a circular form, so that's no interference with the original rebar they left on the roof. And those rebars provide enough safety measure on the roof, and it has this interesting shadow casted on the roof garden. And 2 years later, this client, this curator, came back to me because the next Biennale is gonna happen, and he has a bigger site this time. So he told me, Chen-Xi, now I have a much bigger commission for you. Although the design fee doesn't change much, but the site is a great opportunity for you. The site is 100 times bigger. He had this abandoned air conditioning factory, 10,000 square meters big. And but he said, we have a big challenge. That is time. We only have 1 month to execute the construction, because the exhibition is gonna happen like in 2 months. I can give you 1 month for design, and that's very generous for you. And then we have 1 month for construction. So I think that's something I was not taught in architecture school, how to finish a construction in 1 month. So we tried many ideas, and we finally settled with this material, this membrane. That's very affordable. We just use a very regular light membrane that's used in a lot of house decoration in China. And this material can span 100 meters long even. And this is the original state. So the moment I visit the site, I think maybe we can do very little design work because the space already has its charm. That's if we do little design, we can save a lot of time and the budget. And we thought about this light material that's kind of serpentine or meandering between the strict industrial grid. And we call it time light line because the curator wants to tell the story chronologically for this area from the very early pristine nature to the agriculture year to the industrial period, and then to the current technological development, and even his imagination of the future. So we just drew this one line that's zigzagging between the industrial columns, and its lightweight has this strong contrast to the original structure. And we think it's this zigzagging can provide enough sectors, enough exhibition area for him to tell his chronological story. So from the nature to the agriculture to the technological. And in the end, with this membrane, we achieved the project in 18 days. So although still it's very rough if you zoom in and look at all the edges. But we think it's very interesting. The workers just manually stretching the membrane and fix them in the steel framework and then cut it, and that's it. And it takes only a few days for the membrane work, and there another 10 days earlier they did the steel framework. And all the curation work can happen at the same time. So they just got a lot of the soil and to play the original topographical model of the area. And they had this box. We had this idea of the seed library. So they have a matrix of light box, each host different plants, different local plants, and that plays the role of the agriculture period. So this light membrane wall, we call it time light line, becomes the background for the exhibition when you're standing on the ground. But also, if you're standing from far, it becomes a huge structure, a huge sculpture that is part of the art exhibition. So here's a very simple construction document. We only need to deal with those lighting walls, and their details and the construction method are all the same. So that saves a lot of design time. And we did some iteration. So the walls sometimes are one-sided, the membrane are one-sided, sometimes are two-sided, and sometimes people can walk in. So this material can allow visitors to interact with each other on each side. So that's kind of interesting. We saw many people are playing with this membrane, and that brings another dimension. So that the exhibition is not still, but more dynamic. And we really love the existing structure. We think this beautiful skylight and this very strict industrial grid provides us a very good foundation that we can play with our membrane lightweight structure. So I remember I wrote it when they finally decided to let us put this exhibition design as an art piece. So I wrote it a small paragraph to tell the story of this piece. So by folding the light and time, conceptually initiate a dialogue reflecting the subject narrative, and at the same time physically interpret this vast abandoned area. The rigidly ordered industrial space thus experience a subtle glitch by the faulty line of light, which disturb the passing of time and arouses the dormant relics of history. Time light line is made through folding. On one hand, it jumps out from the ruins of time and occupies the foreground of the space. On the other hand, it acts as a backdrop on which all the fragmented pieces of time unfold. The pristine soil in the first place, the mechanical part from the industrial age, the illusions of the present digital world, or the myths of the future. And in this exhibition hall, we actually leave a lot of space for future activity. We prepared a stage that it can have like small lecture or small gathering, and that's the stepped stage area. And it's surprisingly beautiful when the dust will shine by the light, by the daylight. So because it's very dirty, and we think the dust actually brings more beauty to the exhibition space, and it acts this historical memory. And we leave the rest of the exhibition hall empty, not only for saving the budget, but also we were planning to have a bigger event, like a modern dance performance or some other like bigger performance to happen. And we think those activities can activate the space, and they have bigger role than architecture, than the installation can have. So that's like before the miniature series. So we don't have much chance in the bigger city in Shenzhen to do new construction architecture. But suddenly, because of those renovation projects, a friend came to me and asked, do you want to do architecture, like newly built architecture? We have a countryside place that might need some of public architecture, and you can give a try. And that's a original story of the miniature series. So when I enter the site, I found there's no site. They show me a lot of places. They had this original brief, very rough and very vague. They want to have a building that's can serve public art education and can have some interaction with the community. It's about 300 square meters, but they don't know what specific the program gonna be. But the serving area is huge. It's a rural county that's as large as 630 square kilometers. And they had a lot of candidate site for me. So I went there and spent 3 days visiting different sites. Some are in the peach farm, some are in the mountaintop, and some are in the flower field. And after the site visit, they asked me, like, which one you think is best? You can just do whatever ideal design you wanna do, and we're gonna achieve it. We love architecture. The problem is we don't have enough money. So you might need to wait for a few years. You can do the design slowly, not as other Chinese project. We give you enough time because we need time also to raise fund for our public art building. So after I came back from the site, I thought a little bit, and I think maybe I can propose to divide the brief, the program, into several buildings that can be phased to execute in different phases. And each one can be smaller, cost a small amount of money, and they can be easier to execute, easier to be completed, and to serve the public as soon as we can. So that's the origin of this sketch. When I come back from the site, I brought up this idea to the local community leader, and I said maybe we can do the original brief in different pieces, and then you can do them one by one. You can fund your project little by little. We don't need to achieve like that bigger goal, and you can serve your community like as early as this year. So, and he agreed. I was so surprised, and we got another site visit like for several weeks, and we set up with several villages, and we think for this area we can decide different season and events, and architecture is just an approach to interact with local community with different character, because we saw many interesting sites that each has its own character, like the fishing town, the peach farm village, and there's another village who wanna sell their scallion. They asked me, how can your architecture to promote our scallion sales? And there are some others, they have this opera stage, very famous, and some has a very famous temple, and all people in the nearby county will come to do a prayer. So with all that, we scheduled like a event, a calendar for them. So we think with all this small architecture, we can have this calendar, and the public can get education, and they can have the public gathering at different season and different event. So we develop a little further with this newly written program, and work with them for several rounds of design. They have some very strange design requirement, like for the temple, they just want a bigger wall to hang their prayers, and for the fishing town, they just want to have a stage they can perform. So, but all those different requirements added up and changed my sketch and make every little piece meaningful and more or less better suit to their community life. I just want to introduce the first few that we already completed. This is a peach farm. When I entered there, it's March 13th, 2019. So all the peach trees has their blossom, very beautiful, all pink for the whole farm. So it's interesting that the peach tree are all linked to one side. They call it Y-shape peach tree. So it's all linked to one side, and with this weird arc that towards the sun at west. So we were thinking maybe the architecture can follow the same gesture. It's kind of a weird intuition we got from site. So we had these arcs drawn on the plan and on section, and we have this sculpture form that grew up from ground like a peach tree and towards the sun at west. And although local people are very supportive to our design, they didn't change like any shape, and they just fully trust us. We don't know if we can execute it like well as we thought. But surprisingly, we had 2 architects live there for 2 months to guide them for the form making stage. And surprisingly, they are doing much better than we thought. They use this small board form to build this curvature quite accurately, I would say. So that's something we learned from local workers, that they have this very good craft of concrete building, and they no longer have the skills for the traditional wooden houses, but they can do concrete formwork quite well. But another idea we had during the construction is we thought maybe we can do a pink concrete one, and we use this color to respond to the site, and we can have this very special structure uniquely belong to them. But it's really hard because to get the ideal color we want, we tested for about a month. We had to use white cement instead of regular cement. That means the concrete strength is not calculated, and we had to cast the sample pieces and send to the government for the concrete strength inspection. But thank God, like after 1 month's hard work, we stay on site with the workers, and eventually we get ideal color and the strength and everybody is happy, like what they experimented. So here is the building right after we pull all the formwork out, and it's entirely pink concrete, and sitting in the middle of the peach farm, and has this arc towards the west, like all trees does. And we leave a little passageway towards the pavilion, so we can have this sequence, this progression, and feeling that the pavilion is sitting in the middle of the forest. And all the wooden decks are just get material from local market and crafted by the local workers. And eventually this arc towards the sun at west become very popular. Yeah, kids are like very love it, and they play with it. We do a lot of like detailed drawings, wall sections, as we train in architecture schools. But on the side, actually, that doesn't matter. We had to verbally discuss everything with the workers, and sometimes they have even better idea than our detailed showing, and sometimes they just feel they can't do the way our drawing does. So it's a very hard process, I think, to execute the building than we originally had the drawings done. And this is under the arc, and that becomes a little shaded area for the kids. And we designed the building because we don't want to have a public building that's similar to what they saw. So we had all windows of different shapes that towards different landscape views. Like the entrance one, we had this semi-circular shape that from inside you can look out to all those leaning peach trees, like this entry windows. And there's a small stepped library for kids to sit on. And there's a little story during the construction. I saw this light that's very powerful, magical, and I love it during the construction in April, I believe. And so I told my photographer, like, let's capture this light when it's completed. So my photographer and I sit there and waiting for that light to come, but we waited a full day and didn't get that because the light changes its direction at summer. It only comes from another side of the wall. So all the lighting conditions are kept changing at different seasons. That's something we learned also from a real architecture rather than a Rhino model. That's a simple introduction of the interior space, the stepped library on the ground, and there's a sitting area on the second floor with a big window towards the farm. So that's a rectangular shape window towards the whole farm. And we tried very hard. It's our first building. We try to make the even the sconce, the lighting are unique to their architecture. So we use architecture geometry and build a lighting and put on the wall. And also we want to have this memory of the tree and devoted to the farm. So we work with the local carpenter and cut this geometric tree and cast into the concrete. And we can see all the roughness, all the board form lines on the facade, but it's kind of interesting during night when the light lit up. Yeah, that's the night. And it's funny, like we follow the building very hardly with phone or other communication tools, but it's easier to follow with TikTok. This is a Chinese TikTok. They have this this account called Peach, and that's the owner of the farm. So they show everything, like the harvest, like the grape harvest, and the peach harvest, and even when they are tired, they will post the building and showing their life. So it's kind of interesting. Recently, I just look on their TikTok. They had this beer garden open for the summer, so people will gather around the building and have a sip of the beer. So it's additional income for the villagers too. So with the completion of the first one, they give us more support. So this is a second series that's 20 kilometers away in the northern mountain area. So the first one, the peach hut, is on very flat plain, and this one is on by the mountain. And originally, there's this adobe ruin. And nobody is living in the adobe houses anymore. So we and local people want to have a mini library that they can read. That's a very specific program we get for this one. So the first action, we try to find the RAM Earth workers, like they can do RAM Earth technique, but nobody can do it nowadays. People can only do concrete. So so we quickly give up that idea to restore this building in a traditional way. And we discovered there's a lot of cave dwelling tunnels right behind this adobe ruin. And it's meandering, and people put a lot of lights in. So it becomes a place of interest for local visitors. So we think maybe this interesting meandering space can have some implication in the building. So we have this purely abstract meandering shape that grew up from the original adobe ruin. And we have the entrance punched from the original doorway, and by the way, it's a more modern entrance hall. And its west and east end just jump out and get higher than the original adobe wall to see the farm at distance. So with this meandering plan, we managed to connect the building with the existing cave dwelling paths and the visitor paths. So it becomes like this zigzagging passes, and our building is kind of entrance entrance building or the hub. And we also provided a little outdoor plaza for people to gather. So this is the axon we drew originally, like how this building can rise up and grow from the original adobe ruin. And because the topographical relation, there's a higher plane that's on top of this barren cliff. It's much colorful and beautiful flowers in the spring. So we provide the roof as this stepped sitting, and people can read not only indoor, but also on the rooftop, and they can look at the mountain and the upper farms and flowers and trees. And with the help of the lighting designer, we were able to use lighting to differentiate the different volumes between the newly built library and original adobe walls. And this entranceway with its warm lighting glowing from interior are kind of inviting the visitors to enter. And we had those little cards, not only for the shape of this building, but we kind of wanted to give a hint of our 7 miniature series in this building on its facade, to tell the kids and people, to tell the visitors that there are many other small buildings you can discover in the region. So so far we only completed 3, but we hope in the future that can be a map for people to explore all 7 buildings. And this is where the newly constructed concrete volume jumps out of the adobe wall. Actually, we hide a columns inside the adobe wall, so otherwise the structure can't work. But we put the mud back and hide it. And we can see those hidden structure. Actually, we cheated. And also the topographical relation between the terrace and the rooftop and the mountain nearby, and the small cave dwellings, those tunnels that you can enter from the pass. So it's really, we think the story for this building is about the intertwining of 2 different sets of memory. The old one, the earth, the mud, the adobe house, and the new one, the abstract concrete and modern steel. So we can tell the story from the facade, like the building, the structure jumps out, but it also expressed in the interior. So we kept some original mud and brick wall and let it just sit in the new concrete volumes. And from from all different windows, you can see the countryside, the mountains, the trees, and the cave dwellings, those little tunnels. And this is a rooftop. So we built also a slide for kids to play a little bit. And we think the profile of the section, this meandering, this undulating profile, has something to do with the landscape, and yeah, with the mountain and the farmland. So during the day, people feel this is very plain, this very low-key building that has this very dull palette of color. That's the earth, the mud wall below, and the concrete gray color above. But at night, when the light turned on, so the building will shine. So it tells the story of the newborn structure that we envisioned. And we hope this miracle power can give the building a new story and attract more people to come to this abandoned earth-made villages, and we can really make this village reborn again. Just quickly showing the 3rd one. It's not finished yet, but it's kind of also interesting that people in this village have a very strong desire what they want. They want to have, and this is in Chinese we call the village of fish and rice. That means this village used to have a lot of water, but because of the mining industry during the past 50 years, all the underground water disappeared and sunken. So this village lost its connection with water. So they really want something to do with water. They told me, can you do us a rainbow slide, a rainbow slide that leading to the water. Or you can do us something like a fish pond, or maybe a festival stage. They raise up many different kinds of requirements, and we had to sit down and discuss with them and to reprogram it into a simpler motive. So eventually we proposed to do a theater on water, and it can be a fishing pond during the normal time, but a festival stage during the festival season. So we kept, this is a site, they choose an abandoned water pond, and they think this can be rejuvenated. So we keep this similar language of the miniature series, but to do it simpler as a stage window that opens to public across the water. So there are two different stages, like one up and one below for the orchestra, and the upper one for the host or for the singer. And we try to do 7 different buildings with different facade technique to respond to different environment and site feature. So for this one, we choose bamboo concrete, and we think it has this water wave shape that can be interesting when the sun hit the water and then reflect the light into onto the facade. So we found those local bamboo that's about 9 to 10 diameter, not too big, so very easy to find, and we place them on the facade and cast them. That's the rendering. We had a little playing, but we think the local contractors, they did better than our rendering. They had this bamboo form concrete, eventually a water wave shaped concrete wall. And under the upper stage, we have a little room for changing and for equipment. And this is the construction site, and across the water, there will be a stage area for the audience. And there will be water soon, and we hope it can serve the public sooner this year. So after the miniature series, we got some bigger commission, but they also has some unique challenges. Like this one, we recently completed in Wuhan. The brief is we need to design one building but serves 2 functions. So it has to be a kindergarten, serves 6 classes, and it also has to be a city pavilion as a sales center in the first year to host their sales activity, to host their specific program requirement. And the site is in the middle of Wuhan, like next to Hankou Rail Station and the famous Huanan Seafood Market. So that's where the COVID and the first COVID case was reported in China. And so our project started, I think 2 months before the COVID broke up. And it's paused for a year because of the COVID, and then it continues and finished this year. It's a very typical Chinese residential development. They have this FAR 6.6, very high density residential complex, and they have a little kindergarten for the owners, and they want to save the budget, so they want to use this kindergarten to be their sales center in the beginning. And we study the sun, because in China we have very strict regulation about kindergarten or elementary school sunlight. So it's almost certain we had to put the classrooms next to the south facade and the east facade along those sides. So we take that a step forward, and we think maybe that can be a miniature city, that all the classroom as a little building and they together form a city, and that those floating houses all together can become a connected sales pavilion exhibition hall. So the same spatial concept can serve two different function. So this is the first sketch model I had and discussed with the client. They like this idea of the stacking classroom exhibition hall. And then we had to study the site carefully and to put all classroom according to Chinese code. And all the kindergarten class has to be 120 to 150 square meters big. And all other rooms have also very certain area requirement. And also studying the sunset allow us to put the classrooms where to allow enough sunlight for the sunlight calculation. So that's along the east and south facade. So eventually the building becomes an unfolded, this unfolded set elevation, that the floating classrooms and the floating gardens on top with a little entranceway and general classrooms and some stairway that can be a reverse shape of the house. So this is a concept drawing we had, and this is the recent photos we took on the site, and we kept most structural and space idea towards the end. And looking around, so the east and the west, the east and the south are the only way the classroom can get lights. So all those big residential towers on the west side are actually blocking our opportunity to open up on that side. So such a generic city, and we hope this building can become a little unique space that we can celebrate the education of the kids, and we don't need to have a very simple box for them. And yeah, that's those house shape that's now double height or even a 3-story height for the sales exhibition now, and there will be a floor inserted, and we reserved a place to add the beams like over there. So in future, there will be a classroom on top and a classroom in the middle that has the right area needed to do the as a kindergarten class. And there's some smaller frame that can be used for staircase and circulation. So we had to, this is the first time we are using marble, not marble, a stone. We finally choose the white granite for the building facade. We had to go to the biggest stone market in Xiamen, the southeast coastal city, and to look at all the stones with a client to choose one. And then finally, we convinced them to do the open seam facade with the waterproofing behind, so we can have a cleaner facade without all those glues. Because in China, people most construction like to use glue in between stone panels. And this is the completed facade with white granite panels. So we had to, for the curtain wall facade, we had to also prepare 2 sets of drawing because the curtain wall, especially the full height curtain wall, is not allowed for the kindergarten use according to Chinese code. So we had to reserve place to partly change the glass into operable windows for the kindergarten. And by dividing the glass into several like frames at the beginning, actually we saves a lot of construction budget to do the whole glass when they convert to the kindergarten. And also for the program, we had to study 2 different programs and try to find the right way to convert. And the perfect matching point is we found the model apartment they are selling. They have to have certain model apartment sets. That's about 125 square meter to 140 square meters. And that's almost the same size as the classroom we were required to design. So we use that as a converting point, and all other public space we also study and find the conversion place. So this is the sales pavilion program. It's all connected and bigger space. And then for the kindergarten, it becomes a little classrooms, and in between there's circulation going on. And 2 sets of plan and 2 sets of fire regulation requirement. And this is the final result. And interesting thing is with this floating classroom idea, we feel the space is exaggerated. So as we saw in the construction site, so the building, although it's not so big, it looks much bigger than the surrounding residential units. So actually every kid, because I grew up in Wuhan in the same city, I remember every space in my memory is bigger than the actual space I saw it after I grew up. So I think this exaggerated, this a little bigger sized spatial experience is kind of interesting. It celebrates kids and it celebrates their early memory and early education. And it becomes kind of rebellion against all the generic cities around us, because we see the huge construction site. This sales pavilion gonna sell the apartment to people who buy those towers. So at this construction site, so after the construction finished, there will be more high-rise residential towers in this site, and we think maybe this little building, this 2,000 square meter building, can do a little rebellion to the circumstance. And although it's used very like all the interior uses are determined by the commercial use, and we reserve the possibility to, like, this will be a classroom in the future. And all the structure and space are combined together, and also the circulation. So those are the structure element, and then becomes the circulation device connecting different floors. And from interior space, and those structure element actually becomes the view framer allow people to see the garden. And this is the study we had, like how to add the beams to insert the floors to allow the program to convert to convert it from the sales center to the kindergarten without major structure change. So we had to reserve the joints and for the steel beams to connect in 1 year. So hopefully next year we can see this building converted to an education place. So just to end the lecture, we select a few projects that's still undergoing, and we think that's carried the same spirit and experiment so far. We had one approach is this a small architecture in the rural landscape, and how we can use simple approach to respond to the landscape. And this is in the same town of the miniature series, and it's a flower field, and people sell the flower as a healthy food, and also sell the flower to be a tea gradient. So they want us to do a building to help them to sell the product, but also for them to gather to do a guitar performance, tea tasting event. So we did like very simple geometry, more or less similar to their current house with this simple gable wall. But inside we have some circular shapes, and all the flower field will surround the building in November, and we can see the building blossom in the flower field. Another house project we started like 4 years ago, haven't finished yet. It's a sculptural house for a pair of photographers as their house and studio. So they want to have a very simplistic house that can overlook the countryside landscape. So we provide different kinds of windows, different shape, that's also similar to their neighborhood, their traditional rural neighborhood house. But those frames, they can enjoy the views and have certain simplistic sculptural quality. And we hope this one can finish soon. And another idea we learned from miniature series is to let the architecture to grow from its existence. This is a small pavilion that we are doing in Pingshan Sculpture Park, a big renovation project, but we choose original convenience store building. They are gonna, originally people wanna destroy, they wanna demolish this building to make way for a bigger road. But we think it's such a waste, and we just propose to do a lightweight steel structure and to grow from this originally convenience store and to become art gallery and multifunction space. So those are what we are doing and what we are thinking. We are a very young firm. I'm only 36 years old, and people are even younger than me in my studio. And just to explain a little bit, we named the studio AtelierXi, follow my name more in an English way, because we think that's normal in the English context. But in Chinese context, we don't. I don't want to name the studio followed by my name, so I called it 艺术建筑 in Chinese, explained to be one tree architecture. That we think we are not creator of the space of, especially for the life, for people live in the space. So we are more like tree planters. We plant the space and we let different people encounter with the space. There will be story happening that will be far more interesting than what we can imagine when we design the architecture. And we hope architecture can branch out and blossom with interesting life and narratives. That's my lecture today. Thank you.
Hey, C, thank you very much. That was quite impressive. And I must say, in an ideal situation, I'm just being totally candid, we would spend a significant amount of time in a dialogue, not only between you and I, but hopefully between the students and you as well. So I just want to put out there, right away that the students go into a design studio session 30 minutes. So we have two choices. We can play a game of speed chess, which I'm sure as an academic and a practitioner you're quite accustomed to, and I'm happy to do that. But I also would just like to extend an invitation for you and I, maybe if it works for your schedule, in another afternoon back here in the States, 12 noon, maybe there's an opportunity to give us a greater amount of time with respect to the generosity required to kind of unpack a lot of the issues and really extraordinary issues that you've spoken to. So you don't necessarily have to answer that, and I know you're probably very busy in your practice. If you'd like to contact me offline regarding that, I would be, speaking on behalf of the school, we'd be thrilled and honored to set aside some time, more time for the discussion. But with that said, there's a lot of things that I'm very impressed about, and I'll start off with some comments and then move to some questions. The first one is, I think that it was a beautiful, insightful, didactic lecture, in the sense that a disproportionate number of the audience, as you know, are young emerging architects, and many of them probably in their first, second, and third year in architecture school. So to hear from you areas of inspiration, certain motivations and kind of larger poetic goals, and then set in contrast to, or maybe in relation to, as a kind of integrated proposition, the kinds of pressures that you've had to deal to move these poetic ideas into the built environment. And I can't underscore for the students how wonderfully valuable your presentation was, and the authentic journey that you're engaged in. So I'm going to kind of begin from a 30,000-foot view and then move into a higher degree of specificity. From experience, we all in the architectural community have colleagues and friends and mentors that come from different parts of the world, and yet in architecture, you often find a situation where they have had to kind of move between different cultural and ideological boundaries. You started off your lecture talking about globalization, and yet that is an ideal, yet the reality is that, and you didn't use this term, that there's still a kind of silo model. Maybe it's about, in more explicit political terms, there's a kind of nationalism that has risen up around the world, which is deeply unfortunate for individuals and artists like ourselves, who are much more interested in looking at a kind of hybridized and combinatory exchange of culture. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about how you've both struggled, harnessed, made use of the in-betweenness of your identity. You studied in Tsinghua University in Beijing. You move over to the GSD. Rafael Moneo becomes a mentor of yours. You work for a big in Copenhagen and then Stephen Hall for a number of years in New York City. Very different architects, very different vision, methodologies, and kind of strategies of engaging the world. And I'm just, it's a complicated question answer, but I'm just curious if you could talk about that in-betweenness as being something valuable and important in your life.
Thanks, Evan, for your generous words. It's I think it's truly an interesting point you brought up, that this in-betweenness, because many times when I was a little even younger, when I was in GSD, I worked at Big before, and then I returned back to GSD. And some of my Spanish teacher, they saw my work, followed very strictly the BIG identity, or maybe the OMA identity, very diagrammatic and straightforward, kind of one linear design approach. They criticize a lot, and that's a moment I had this this doubt, like different designers has such different ideology, like towards the design approach. So like what I learned from the BIG and even from some American school is this very clear logical progression of design process. That is easier for executing the design project, from a simple concept through diagrams, through drawings, to the final result. But then I remember my instructor, Professor Inaki Abalos, and also Rafael Moneo, when I was listening to his lecture with Peter Eisenman. So very clear conflict between American scholar and those Spanish scholar, that one proposed this very logical, very clear design approach, and another one is very, I would say, they propose something experiential. I remember when Moneo in his lecture pointed to Louis Kahn's SoC Institute. He pointed out it's transcendental. That's a very interesting word. I don't know what transcendental means in the class as a foreign student at that moment. But later, when I went to SoC Institute, I realized the power. Like when architecture has this interesting relation with the landscape, when the horizon appears in between Louis Kahn's concrete volume in front, I think that's the moment I understand what he's trying to express. So till today, I still found myself in between those two ideology. Like one proposed very simple and clear design solution. And I think it's important to let the audience, let the client or users to know what the design purpose is. But on the other hand, I was trying to find unexpected chance to alter the design, to do some mistake, or to do some unexpected detriment to make the design work more personal and more experiential and more unexpected. So I think that takes many years for me to realize those two different forces influence on myself. And till today, I'm still, I think, trying to balance all those different power.
No, thank you for that answer. And I mean, I suppose it's interesting because as an emerging firm and those early projects that you shared with us, they were quite difficult from the outside. I mean, there was an explicit limit of funds, a limit of time, certain kind of building expertise. There, you know, as in the case of the Domino Pavilion, you imagine this, you have to return the building to a former owner. I mean, kind of beautifully strange and perverse limitations, but you kind of acted like a kind of a beautiful wizard, where you're able to move rather seamlessly between architecture as a kind of as a performance, as a kind of an action drawing. And I'm again reminded of the doors that rotate, the fiber optic lights that illuminate the floor and the ceiling, and the folded line in the massive exhibition space. These are dealing with a certain immateriality and how to create a sense of presence and mark space and time with things that have a soft touch in the world. And that requires, you know, it's like tuning a violin. You understand how to do that, yet at the same time you're able to shift. In the case of the kindergarten project, the miniature series, you recognize the importance, the value, even though the budgets have increased significantly, of architectures having an aesthetic, a spatial presence, and even a kind of a sense of branding in a way, but not in a, and I'm not talking about from a kind of capitalist standpoint, branding as a kind of memory machine. I just want to kind of applaud you for your ability to kind of deal with restraint and the economy of means in such a kind of precise manner. It's not easily understood, as you spoke about the Salk Institute, and it's certainly not easy to execute. Probably, you know, given the predisposition for architects to want to make things that have a real presence and have, you know, a powerful impact. So it's not really a question in those comments, but you know, a real compliment, right? And I'm going to make a shift here for a second, because I do think this is important. We haven't spoken about this. I don't know if you know this, C, but we have a partnership with Tongji University in Shanghai, and have had for many.
I don't feel it.
Yeah, for many decades. And I remember actually a number of years ago, the leadership informing me that the central government of China had decided to redirect their focus, both in terms of a cultural agenda and an economic one, in the rural communities as a place of opportunity and a necessity in the context of strengthening the nation. I'm just curious if you could speak about your miniature series as part of a larger agenda and momentum throughout China, and the kinds of exciting opportunities afforded a young architect such as yourself moving into that territory.
Right. I think you are pointing to a very crucial agenda of the government. Like they are truly encouraging a lot of development in the rural area, but not as generic or as simplistic as before. Like I remember, like 10 years ago, they move everybody. Like there's this policy to concentrate the rural land to make the land more efficient and build this very simple concrete apartment for them. And then I think after many years, the government learned from that policy and its afterwards, aftermath. And then they are now encourage this kind of new rural revival movement. And I think it's part to do with the other topic you mentioned, the nationalist, like this kind of national confidence, like the whole country, the whole society is facing, that people, especially the rural people, rural village people are all flowing to the big cities, especially the younger one. So only the elderly people and the kids left in the society. For many years, that becomes a standard condition. So now the bigger policy is trying to invite the middle-aged or even younger people back to the village and to create a better life and better imagination for them. So that brings a lot of architects to work in the rural area nowadays, and not only the younger one, but also very established ones. They are all doing this, but different architect and they take different approaches in the rural area, like the Pritzker winner, like Wang Shu or some other. I think they are following a path to modernize the traditional Chinese architecture, and they try to build a more close connection towards the local material and craftsmen. But I think it's interesting that for the miniature series, I met this community leader who is now I think the county mayor, who studied politics in Boston University for his PhD degree. So when he met me, he told me I think no client told me things like this. He told me architecture is a great weapon. Like you can mobilize the society, you can mobilize the community. So just use your weapon and just open your power. So that's a very rare circumstance for a young architect. I'm very grateful for that opportunity. And that's a reason I think we are taking a more aggressive approach in that project comparing to other project, not only for its programming, but also for its architecture language and the construction approach. I mean, looking back, I can't believe we proposed to do the on-site pin concrete with local workers. They don't know how to customize concrete pigment. But at the moment, we together, the client, and my team and the local community, we just had that courage. We believe that we are doing something important, and that's different from the other rural community. So I think altogether we gain that courage to do this thing, and I don't even believe we can do it again successfully. So yeah.
I mean, it's really interesting that going into those rural communities, it comes with a certain degree of risk, right? Because and again, I'm generalizing here, but the architect could be interpreted as the other, a kind of an elitist that is coming down and asserting their identity and their worldview, yet you've been very conscious of the fact that there are tactics that can be devised that ascribe to a soft landing, and one that's receptive and welcoming. So I thought your distributed model for the miniature series was brilliant for all the reasons that you described. I'm interested in the kind of shape grammar that you're using in both the kindergarten and the miniature series, one being the arc and the other one being a kind of a typological inscription of house, and then reconfiguring it in ways, it's almost as though if it gets distributed in the landscape, but I'm back to the miniature series, that if they were to travel like a Calvino story, they would find some reference or inscription of a previous building found in another village, right? I mean, you started the presentation talking about inspiration, Philip Glass and a whole series of composers and choreographers that brought tears to your eyes because something unexpected and magical emerged out of the work. My sense is that it's very difficult to talk about it. It's very difficult to point to it, but because of the sensitivity and the kind of inclusion of the community and the craftsmen that you've brought into your projects, that as you leave, these buildings are part of them. And I think that's very powerful. I think hey guys, you got to turn your microphone off. It's getting loud here. Thank you. Yeah, see if you want to respond. Robert, maybe you can turn all the mics off.
I'm trying to find the sword.
Go ahead, C. I don't know if you want to say anything to that.
Right. I think it's a weird starting point. I brought up those inspirations from great artwork I saw in New York, but I think that's part of my inspiration and gradually becomes an intuition. Like when we were facing the very local, very Chinese community, those images are still in my mind, although maybe subconsciously I was referencing to referring to them, but that becomes kind of resources. And I think that's important because as I told you, I believe many people, they are follow this political correction of architecture, that we have to build local architecture following local architecture resources and local culture reference. I think that's that can be broke. I think that can be a little bit open, and we can have more hybrid culture reference. I mean, not only in China, also in the US. When I look at great artists like Noguchi and all those great works, I think that's a beauty that people living from different society learn from each other and they do interesting work. And I think that's also related to the in-between identity you point out of me. And I'm quite proud of that. And yeah.
C, well, there's two questions here. I believe that you spoke to Marcus's question, although it's a really important one, and I just want to call attention to that. And I'm sure he has many more, given that he knows you really well and respects you. Another question is coming from Professor Oatman, who currently is teaching a design studio in the upper level studios on exhibition design, or that's part of the delivery system. And he writes a wonderful presentation. Could you speak a little bit more about the importance for young architects designing temporary exhibitions? It seems that this was a significant aspect of your early practice and may have helped you conceptualize the role of the viewer as related to the many experiential concerns of clients. In other words, could you speak about exhibition as a teaching tool, as an experiment and a testing ground? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, I am very grateful for the early opportunity to do exhibition design. And we were kind of joking, the Shenzhen architecture Biennale saved a lot of architects' career. Otherwise, they might already change to other industry. I think it's a testing ground, not only for the design sensibility, but also for the overall capacity to, because when I was working as a designer in big names office, I don't need to worry about the execution of the project, the budget, the time, and all the public relation and all the permit thing. But that's very real. Even when you do a small exhibition design, you had to deal with all of them, and it's just a little easier than an actual building. So if I encourage all the younger architect or student, if they have chance to do a small, even just like 1 square meters, like a little thing or furniture or whatever, as long as you get a chance to do that, just do it. There's much more difficult parts than you can imagine. So I think also because of those exhibition experience, I gradually narrowed down the design agenda when I get a design commission. Because if I wanted to achieve 10 tasks and everything with brilliant idea and great execution, then I'm killing myself. It doesn't gonna happen. But if we can focusing on one thing that can respond to the requirement of the exhibition, of maybe we can respond to visitor experience, like in one aspect, then that can become the successful part of the execution. So I think gradually from those 20 square meter project to 100 square meters project to a bigger factory renovation project, we continued that approach to narrow down the design agenda and try to use one design agenda to solve all the concerns, all the requirement from the client, from the visitors, from the users. And if we do one thing, we can solve 10 problems. We know we got the right answer to the circumstance. And especially for small project like exhibition, I think that's a great training and opportunity to test that skill.
See, that's a great answer. Thank you for that. And certainly in the context of designing one's future, you've proven that you could work essentially at any scale under any set of conditions, as long as you use the poetic imagination, right, that you've got as a gift. In one of your interviews, I don't know if it's a quote, but you described just a little bit about your pedagogical strategy, which was assigning a series of books, readings, stories, literature to your students, and asking them to use this as a point of departure in the genesis of making architecture. And I just want to call attention to the fact that when I was a young man, I had the opportunity to work directly with someone who you're probably familiar with, John Haydick, at Cooper Union. And I know Stephen has been very influenced by John. and it's a much more complicated discussion, but I just wanted to kind of highlight the fact that moving outside the discipline of architecture, one, as an opportunity for extraordinary material that can inspire you, I think is common in many great architects. Number two, that the idea of architecture as a kind of mythos and something that tells stories and not ones that are necessarily fixed, but and illustrative in the most superficial way, but something that may be more ethereal, more abstract, but yet captivates the imagination of the user, the inhabitant, and so forth. This is not something that we often see today in many schools of architecture, probably for a variety of reasons. But I think it's mostly because it's misunderstood. And I'm curious if you could speak to the idea of the literary source as something valuable to the discipline of architecture, and the kinds of challenges and opportunities that you face with those translative leaps, both as a teacher and a maker.
Great question. I do find those teaching methods useful. I would say, I don't know if it's correct or incorrect, but I found that method very useful. If I give 10 short novels of Calvino to students and let them each pick one to do a house out of it, then at least I know how I can have a expectation how they can translate the this text narration into a spatial narration, and there are a few possibilities they can carry on. And in the beginning, when I give them that task, it's very hard even for myself to get a clue. It might get into the literal translation or literal execution of the novel, of the text narration. But later, I found there's a very interesting translation technique. It's hard to tell, but that's very important. That can give us as architects a lot of additional resources to face the reality. And eventually that becomes a way we can judge the design of ourselves. Because usually for architecture, I can't tell my work good or bad technically, because this detail can be done in 100 different ways, but they each has its reasonable explanations. But if we have a story behind it, if we have even it's just a borrowed story from a novel or from what else, it becomes a clear sequence that we can tell the story. And once we had this story, we had our judgment and our criteria towards the design process. And I think that's a ladder. Once you get into the good design result or good design process, you can kick that ladder away. But that's a very helpful ladder for confused architect like me sometimes and students to get into a right track and to get his head clear to tell a clear story. And I think that's I understand what you're saying. It might get into argument that it's not correct, but I do believe that's a very useful approach.
Well, I would maybe add to that. I would make the distinction because, again, every academic program is very different. The source material could range from a painting to a notation to a poem to a book to a historical precedent, and and these represent, as a starting point, a kind of launch into a kind of an interpretive journey where their own voice will hopefully assume the privileged status. But I would also, so that that's I'm describing the actual sequential operations that one might encounter as you move closer to the proposal. But I would also argue that great architecture is a kind of shared form of inheritance. That you know, the experiences, however fleeting they may have been at a table with Raphael Mineo, you know, or a lecture of Rem Koolhaas, or a visit to a Lou Kahn building, something is transmitted and to that individual as author, like you and I. And if you're open and receptive to it, it can inform the creative agency of your work, whether you're conscious of it or not. So I suppose when I think of storytelling, it isn't I'm not thinking of it literally, but the way in which great architecture communicates to future generations, long after the architect author is not around or has disappeared, like a Antonio Gaudi building, right?
Right.
He still draws millions of people around the world to the Sagrada Familia because something is emanating within that building. And I think you get that. And I think it's a rare gift. And my last, at least question of today's discussion, and as I mentioned, we could pick this up and continue, would be, how do you see yourself and your practice 10, 20 years from now?
I don't know. I think we are still learning, and I still are doing a lot of reflection of the experience and the education I get from school, or from Stephen, or from other travel experience. So I don't know what that can lead me. I think to a certain point, I think the story is important to me because that can give me a clue where I'm heading to, and that story can be told at different scale. This can be at a project scale, and can be a practice scale, and even I'm still thinking architecture is bigger than the building itself. It can be social and can be political. So that's something I give topic to my students at thesis design, and they just don't know what to do and messed up. So I'm thinking maybe in 10, 20 years, I'll try to answer and to propose a bigger story and share with you and everybody.
No, it's a beautiful answer, and it underscores how modest and humble you are. But that's certainly no indication of how powerful and fearless and courageous the work is. I mean, it's really, really special work, C, and I applaud you, and I really look forward to following your career in the years ahead. And I think you have already made a contribution to both your homeland and to the world community of architects. So congratulations. Thank you for staying up late into the night on our behalf. And I'm sure that I speak on behalf of all the students and faculty that were present today or will hear and see this presentation in the coming days ahead. Thank you. And
It's a great honor.
And we hope to have you here in person one day when
Sure, yeah,
the pandemic disappears.
sure, yeah. I'll make it.
Okay, see, thanks. Have a wonderful night's sleep, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, see you later.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye.